myself on mute and say thank you, Liz, and hand over to you.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Liz, I'm from the University of York, and I'm going to talk today about my PhD study, which is thankfully completed now. Yeah, took a long time to get there, but it's done now. So I'm going to talk about the research that I did as part of my PhD, and then some of the research that I'm kind of hoping to go on and talk about. As Adam said, I think we'll have questions at the end, but if there's anything that I'm talking about that doesn't make sense, please do give me a shout, and I'm happy to explain things if it's not. I'm conscious that this is probably written for social care audiences, so sometimes we forget, don't we, that we have particular language that we use within our different areas. So I've tried to make sure that there's nothing in there that isn't really obvious, but I might not always get it right. And I have to have a disclaimer in here because my research was funded through the National Institute for Health and Care Research, that this is independent research, that it is not necessarily the views of the National Institute for Health Research, the School for Social Care Research, or the Department of Health and Social Care. So today I'm just going to talk really quickly through what the context of my research was, how I set out the study, and then really focusing on the findings and what's going to come next, hopefully. So in terms of the population that we're talking about, we have a bit of a better idea now from the most recent census, because obviously we finally started to ask questions about sexual identity within that most recent census. So we know that there's around 21 million people aged over 50 in the UK, and around 6% of those are people that identify as something other than heterosexual. So that equates to about 1.26 million LGBTQ plus people aged over 50. And to put some context around that in terms of social care, in 2022-23, there were more than 2 million requests for social care. So this is through local authorities. This is formal requests for assessment or, reaching out for some kind of help. So within that, we can assume that around 120,000 of those people fit into the LGBTQ plus category. And within that number, we can assume that around 23,000 of those people will be funding their own care. So they may seek out assessment and support from the local authority, but won't necessarily be entitled to any support from in terms of financial support or care navigation. And that doesn't then account for people that might seek out support independently or who might not seek out support for lots of reasons. We know that with marginalised communities, they're much less likely to seek out support until they're really in crisis. So we also know that those numbers are much lower than the reality of the situation. So one of the things that kind of some of you may have heard of minority stress, this was really a kind of a basis for some of the research that I was doing. There was a report done by the government in 2019 around health and social care for LGBT plus communities, which found that actually people who were part of the LGBT community generally had similar needs to the rest of the population, but had very different experiences of being supported in health and social care settings. And one of the things that impacts on that, well, firstly, is that there's often a conflation with sexual health. So people assume that the relevance of sexual identity is that you want support around sexual health, and actually that's not necessarily the reason, but also because of minority stress. So minority stress is the theory that the kind of prejudice and discrimination that you experience as a member of a marginalised community is cumulative. So over time, that becomes worse and worse and worse and impacts you in more and more different ways. That comes from the levels of discrimination that you experience, the lack of social capital that you may have. So particularly for the LGBT plus community, we're thinking about the fact that people may not have families of origin or children that can support them, where those natural support systems might be, and that they may be much more socially isolated. You're much more likely to have a lower socioeconomic status if you're part of the LGBT community, and you've got that accumulation of stress. So we see much higher numbers in terms of depression, self-harm, drug and alcohol misuse, and social isolation more generally for the whole LGBT population, not just older people. So that means that then there's a higher risk of a whole range of things. So you can see there's some lists here: depression, anxiety, suicide, poor mental health outcomes, cognitive impairment, premature death, and much higher use of services, tending to be in crisis rather than preventative and early intervention type services. And like I say, there's a range of reasons for that. Some of these things will be perpetuated by intersectionality. So actually, if you're also a member of a minority ethnic group, then you know there's sort of cultural issues around whether you're going to have confidence in services, whether you're going to trust formal services. So anything like that will also then have an even bigger impact on the way that you engage with services and engage with needing support. And when we talk about social care, you know, it can be anything from just having somebody to talk to once a week, to help with your shopping, help with your cleaning, right through to full sort of 24-hour care. So there, you know, there really is a whole range of things that sit within the title of social care, the umbrella of social care more generally. So existing research kind of tells us that there's a whole lot of issues for the LGBT community, in particular older people. So Stonewall did a survey which gave us quite a lot of information. It was quite a long time ago now, but it gave us a real baseline of some of the issues that we were dealing with. So 3 in 5 older people not confident that social care will meet their needs. That for 72% of that group of people, needing care was their biggest concern around aging, that they felt that their LGBTQ identity would have a negative effect on that they anticipated needing to hide their sexuality, especially in residential care, that they were really, really kind of worried about being able to retain connections to their LGBT communities and the networks that they've built, so their families of choice. That the historic experiences that they have will influence decision making, their attitudes, the way that they kind of perceive the experiences that they have in social care, and that the care that they're going to receive just won't be culturally competent, so won't be mindful of their sexual identity. So the study that I did kind of had 3 stages, really. I did a literature review, a scoping review, to look at what do we already know, what do we already understand about this population and their use and experience of social care. Then I did some interviews with older LGBTQ people and service providers who were also part of the LGBT community but were delivering services of various types. And then I ran some focus groups which included providers, mostly heterosexual providers, which was really important to try and include that kind of perspective, but then also some people that were part of the LGBT community themselves, from a range of different types of providers. So some really informal sort of community grassroots groups, right through to sort of home care and those kinds of people delivering care in people's own homes. So one of the kind of most important things that came out of that was the importance and relevance of LGBTQ identity and older person identity. So that kind of intersectionality that we talk about, but with being an older person and what comes along with that. People wanted to have some really tangible links to both the LGBT community, but also their local community as well. But this was really, really complex and defined by their comfort with disclosing and how much they expected to be discriminated against within those settings. People had some really kind of horrendous historic experiences. I talked to people who had conversion therapy, people who'd been estranged from their family, who'd suffered from physical violence, lost their jobs and livelihoods as a result of their sexual identity, had been ostracised from their local communities, places of worship, some of the places that they would, you know, normally seek out some of those social connections. And this influenced the experiences that they had and the way that they perceived those experiences going forward. So their decision making, even though things have changed since they were much younger, was still influenced by fear and shame. And alongside that, that created feelings of vulnerability, less energy to advocate for themselves, and an expectation that their rights and wishes wouldn't be considered or relevant, thought of as relevant within social care. So you can see this is a really kind of messy diagram, but that's kind of on purpose to show you how all of these different things are connected. There was internal and external feelings that were impacting feelings about social care. So it was influencing how people felt, how they made judgments, how they experienced inclusivity. They felt that some elements were more marked when they were younger and that they weren't so important now, but then there was other elements that were much more pertinent now as they were in their sort of later years. So that waning resilience to the invisibility of their sexual identity was felt to be much more relevant in social care than it perhaps might have been in other situations in their younger years. So, for example, in the workplace. And the ongoing need to disclose was felt to be really frustrating in terms of how that then was used as a way to shape care and support. And the fact that then in their sexual identity was being negated was causing harm and distress and resulting in unsuitable services. So all participants that I spoke to wanted to be open and wanted to talk about their sexual identity and that part of their lives. Only one had actually ever been asked for that information in any kind of interaction that they'd had with social care services. So basically providers felt it wasn't relevant. They weren't asking, they didn't understand why they would ask, and actually none of them collected information. Even the ones that were LGBT plus people themselves weren't collecting information about sexual identity as a matter of course. And it was interesting because some providers did talk about, well, actually, if I know that about a person, it might mean that I would do this or I would do that. So they were understanding the fact that they might change the way that they were approaching care with those people, but still weren't asking those questions. And there was a lot of talk about, well, we don't want to ask people, they'll be really offended if we ask them those questions. Actually, wider research, particularly within healthcare settings, shows that people aren't offended by asking, regardless of age group and regardless of sexual identity themselves. So heterosexual people aren't offended by being asked that question in general. And neither are people that are part of the LGBT community. However, practitioners are very uncomfortable about asking. So it's not uncomfortability of the people that are being asked, it's the people that are asking those questions. And interestingly, when you look at the research, asking that question is seen as in and of itself as a sign of inclusivity. So if somebody is asked that question, they assume that that service is more inclusive just because they've been asked that question. The other concern that providers had was that if we ask the question, then that somehow indicates that we're going to change the way that we approach care. So why would we do that? Because we're not going to approach care any differently, even though all providers talked about person-centered approaches, which is this kind of in health and social care is an approach where we look at the individual person and we deal with that individual person as opposed to doing the same thing with everybody. So all of them said that they were taking person-centered approaches, but none of them did this kind of thing in terms of that being a person-centered approach to somebody's sexual identity. The other thing that sort of came out was really, really important was around the systems, heteronormative systems that we use, and the workforce. So both the kind of skills that they already have and things like training and how we kind of build up that inclusivity and that accessibility. Everybody felt, you know, providers and people themselves felt that training was the key to doing that. There was some issues around the fact that people felt the most believable way to do that was for people to tell their own stories. And I'll come in my conclusions to why that is a little bit problematic. But yeah, you know, there was really this kind of approach that if person-centered approaches were being used, then we didn't need to think about these things on an individual basis. There was also lots of reliance on it being a cultural and management kind of driver for making changes, for building awareness. And that was problematic as well, because if you didn't have that at the higher levels of an organisation, or you'd got very informal organisations that didn't have that kind of management management structure, then there was a real lack of drivers to do it. The regulators don't ask, you know, local authorities don't ask when they're funding services for you to collect that information or respond to that part of a person's identity. And the systems that we have in place are just very, very heteronormative in terms of the questions that are asked in assessments. You know, are you married? You know, do you have children? All of those things that, you know, kind of separate out the LGBT community from everybody else. So there was a range of things that people identified as would be positive actions and markers that they would kind of look for, or that providers could do. Acting as a network or a community catalyst was felt to be really important on both sides. So that helped organisations to build networks and connections, but it also helped individual people to feel that they were being thought about and considered. Clear indicators, you know, so things like rainbows, same-sex couples in advertising materials, really simple things, that markers that people looked for to say, oh, okay, this organisation is inclusive. Training systems that were robust, that included sexual identity and LGBTQ lives as part of those, and not just a general kind of EDI, and things that tackled discriminatory practices to really shift culture were seen as really important. There were some challenges for providers, and there does need to be some support frameworks put in place around that. So they need to understand who is part of the LGBT community. They need to ask the right questions, but they need to build their skills to have those inclusive conversations. So to make sure that they can build trust and create those safe spaces to have some of those conversations, to particularly talk about why LGBTQ identity might be relevant to social care and the way that they're delivering and receiving social care. There needs to be an acknowledgement of how important this is, and the fact that devaluing somebody's identity can be really, really problematic from a mental health point of view and a social isolation point of view, and that we need to make sure that we're really creating the ways to make those links into local LGBT communities. So there's some work that needs to be done around this. Attitudes towards sexual identity questions needs to really be tackled. The efficacy of reliving lived experience as part of a training offer really needs to be understood. The benefits and methods of community connection. So how do services do that? How do they link into the local LGBT community? And then how do we develop staff skills around having some of those more inclusive conversations? So overall, providers were keen to make changes, but they need to be manageable. They need some guidance around that. The indicators of inclusivity are actively sought out, and they're used to make judgments. So providers need to start thinking about how they can embrace those. They need to understand the relevance of LGBTQ identity much more deeply than they do at the moment. The stuff around storytelling as a most effective training tool is problematic because there isn't support frameworks for people who are telling those stories, but also they're always negative. So they're always going to be, here's my terrible experiences. They don't actually give providers the tools to go, right, this is what good practice looks like. These are the things that we need to do to make sure that we're moving that forward. And they need that guidance to really build confidence. But the benefits of doing some of these things are much broader than just the LGBT community, because being more inclusive, being more culturally competent makes services better for everybody, not just the LGBT community. And although we have to acknowledge that this might be a moment in time in terms of the older population that we have and the experiences that they've had that will be very different from my experiences, and then the people that come behind me, the younger generations, we do still need to make sure that we're thinking about how we embed some of these real cultural shifts into what we're delivering. That's everything I had to say, so thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Oh, thank you so much, Liz. That was absolutely fascinating. And I could see people nodding along in kind of that understanding and recognition of some of those really important points you made, and lots of notes to be made as well. So I've no doubt there'll be some questions towards the end. But for now, thank you so much. And we'll save those questions for a short while. Fantastic. Thanks, Liz. So our next speaker is the wonderful Disha Sharma. Now, I must apologise to Disha because I thought I advertised this event as 10 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, which until Disha emailed me this morning, I didn't realise we're not actually in. So my apologies, Disha, and I appreciate your flexibility in arranging your diary to join us today. Disha's presentation is called Queer Belonging, Experiences of LGBTQIA+ Students in Indian Higher Education. So Disha, thank you so much. And if you're ready, I will hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Adam. I'll just share my PPT. Let me just, is it visible? Is my PPT visible?
Yep, we can see that.
Okay. Okay. Good day, everyone. I'm Disha. I'm currently pursuing PhD in education at Ambedkar University, Delhi, India. I want to take a moment to sincerely thank Dr. Adam Brett for creating the LGBT Research Network. Your dedication has brought us scholars together and given us a space to engage in meaningful discussions on important and sensitive topics. I'm also deeply grateful to all of you for being here today and contributing to this conversation. Where I come from, discussions about queer lives are present, but they are rare. So this platform holds a great significance for me. Today, I'm excited to present on queer belonging experiences of LGBTQIA plus students in Indian higher education. So in today's presentation, I will be sharing insights from my ongoing PhD research, which focuses on university life and the everyday experiences of higher education in India. So my study examines how students navigate their journeys at Equity University, which is a public state university in New Delhi, India. Over a span of 16 months, from March 2022 to June 2023, I collected data through in-depth interviews, participant observations, and archival records. In today's presentation, I will be discussing the key findings and insights from my research. So university life presents a complex landscape where experiences are both diverse and multifaceted. It is a space where queer phobia and queer affirmative environments coexist, and this ongoing tension has been a significant focus throughout my study. Queer students at Equity University have shared some deeply troubling experiences of queer phobia on campus. For instance, both students and faculty have been involved in dead naming queer individuals. In another case, a faculty member insisted to a queer student that there are only two genders. This refusal to recognize diverse gender identities not only disrespects students' personal identities but also enforces a restrictive binary view of gender that can be deeply alienating and harmful. When this behavior comes from an authority figure, it doesn't just undermine the safety of queer students, it also creates a hostile environment where their identities are marginalized. One student, for example, who presents as masculine, was bullied simply for wearing nail polish. So, this type of bullying is a reflection of broader societal attitudes that stigmatize deviations from traditional gender norms and highlights the intense pressure queer students face to conform to heteronormative standards, even in a university setting that should be ideally inclusive. Many students have also shared that straight students, particularly men, often avoid interacting with their queer peers. Other students have mentioned that their classmates refuse to pursue friendships with them solely because they are queer. This avoidance further exasperates the isolation that queer students feel, reinforcing the notion that their identities are unwelcome and unacceptable. One particularly disturbing example of queer phobia was the university's decision to whitewash all graffitis on the walls, including the Trans Remembrance Wall, which had honored trans martyrs. The Azadi Wall, which can be translated as the Freedom Wall or Dissent Wall, it displayed the Pride flag and it was also erased. During the Pride Parade on June 16, 2023, a student pointed out that, and I quote, whitewashing these spaces is a very overt attack on the queer community. So these walls were important symbols of queer identity, history, and resistance. By erasing them, the university didn't just remove visible symbols of queer identity, it effectively erased the identities and struggles of queer individuals from the university's cultural landscape. This action sends a clear message of invisibility and denial regarding the experiences and rights of queer students. The erasure is more than just a simple act of maintenance. It is a strategic denial of queer history and visibility. Such instances are not unique to Equity University. Similar actions have been reported in newspapers across other universities as well. For example, at another public university, students were denied permission to form queer collective under the pretext that the university is a political space. So this highlights the broader systemic issues of discrimination faced by queer students in educational institutions. The experiences shared by queer students at Equity University highlight not just the challenges they face, but also the deep sense of belonging they seek within the campus community. There was a time when the university was more affirming of queer identity. However, with recent changes in leadership, which align with the right-wing ideology of the government, the atmosphere has shifted, making it more difficult for queer students to feel that same sense of belonging. The pandemic further compounded these challenges. During the university's closure, not only were academic and social activities interrupted, but critical discussions on issues important to the queer community were also halted. This break affected the culture of reflexivity and acceptance that once made the campus a more inclusive space. As a result, the strong sense of community that had fostered a feeling of belonging among queer students has weakened, leaving many of them struggling to find the same level of support and understanding they once relied on. Yet, despite these changes, many queer students still report feeling a stronger sense of safety and belonging within the university than outside of it. This is significant because it highlights the contrast between the relative safety of the campus and the hostility of the broader society. Outside the university, queer students often face harassment, while within the campus, even though the male gaze and exclusionary practices have intensified, they still know that they are less likely to face physical violence. However, this safety does not equate to a true sense of belonging, as exclusion and marginalization are still an issue. Yusuf, a queer student, shared a story about wearing a sari on campus. A sari is a traditional Indian garment typically worn by women. So Yusuf shared that Equity University was the first public space where he ever wore a sari. Although he initially felt uncomfortable due to the gazes from others, the support of his friends helped him overcome this discomfort. Saransh, another queer student, brought an extra sari and helped Yusuf wear it, which gave him the confidence to fully embrace the experience. The presence of supportive friends turned a potentially alienating experience into one of belonging and acceptance. So, this story underscores the critical role of community in fostering a sense of belonging. Even in an environment that has become less affirming, the solidarity and support of peers can create spaces where queer students feel seen, accepted, and valued. This sense of belonging is not just about the physical safety. It is about being part of a community where one's identity is respected and celebrated. To further the argument, it is important to recognize that students are not passive. I draw from Michel Decroix's The Practice of Everyday Life to understand how students actually navigate university life, asserting their agency in the face of challenges. So this resistance is not just an abstract concept, but is manifested in their everyday actions. For instance, queer students often engage in everyday acts of resistance to assert their identities and challenge discrimination. One example, as shared before, involves queer students noticing that their classmates were avoiding friendships with them because of their identities. So these classmates criticized everything from the way queer students spoke and walked to their use of makeup, labeling them as weird. In response, the queer students came together to make a statement. They wore nail polish, played music and danced, and they clearly showed that they would not remain silent or be pushed into the background. Another notable instance of their resistance was when queer students, alongside male peers, chose to get their noses pierced together, symbolizing solidarity and defiance against societal norms. A particularly significant example occurred during Trans Remembrance Day. So students organized a march and placed candles in front of the now whitewashed Trans Remembrance Wall, which had honored trans martyrs. So this is the picture of the now current Trans Remembrance Wall. So all the names of the trans people who were killed, who were murdered, just for being trans or just for being queer, their names were put up on this wall. But the university whitewashed this wall, so students conducted a march on Trans Remembrance Day. So they did this to commemorate those who had lost their lives solely because they were queer, and this action asserted their presence and honored the memory of these individuals despite the erasure of their symbols from the wall and the university landscape. These actions demonstrate how queer students navigate and resist marginalization, using their everyday lives to challenge exclusion and assert their identities. Their resistance is a powerful testament to their agency and determination to be seen and heard in an environment that often seeks to diminish their presence. Students at Equity University have demonstrated remarkable agency by creating queer affirmative spaces and organizing events to foster a sense of belonging. For example, the Queer Club hosted a film screening for Pride Month and displayed slogans such as "Pyar hua, ikrar hua, queer hai to kya hua," which can be translated in English as "Love and promises were made. So what's the issue if I'm queer?" And then another slogan was "Trans is beautiful," and there were many more slogans like this. So these slogans and events not only celebrated queer identities, but also challenged prevailing norms by asserting the visibility and legitimacy of queer experiences. Additionally, a student political organization held a pride parade, singing revolutionary songs and chanting slogans such as "Pyar karne ki azadi" or "Na karne ki azadi," which is the freedom to love and the freedom not to love. And during this parade, so when a security guard inquired about the parade, students explained their purpose, that is to advocate for everyone's right to love whomever they choose. So this incident is significant because the security guards were otherwise seen as extensions of the administration, often surveilling the students by capturing their photos and videos and sharing them with the university head to eventually target students. However, in this particular instance, the guard was not only interested in queer celebrations but also was queer affirmative. The LGBTQ plus circle created by psychology students as part of the internship was another significant initiative. This space allowed queer students to share their experiences and trauma, and this space, one student labeled this space as micro safe space. So this concept of micro safe space was explained as a small temporary environment that provide crucial safety and support within a larger, often queerphobic university context. However, the effectiveness of this micro safe space diminished when a queer student unintentionally used a dead name for another queer student, and this is separate from the incident that I shared earlier. So as a result, the student who was affected stopped attending this LGBTQ plus circle. So this incident highlights the challenges of maintaining safe and inclusive environments and underscores the need for continuous sensitivity and inclusivity. All the themes we have discussed help us to understand the concepts of belongingness and non-belongingness in the university life. So belongingness is not static or linear experience. It's dynamic and constantly shifting. Acts of friendship such as hugging and gestures of care like exchanging flowers are common among students. They also find comfort in shared experiences, whether it's showing affection to campus animals or sharing home cooked meals. Additionally, some students have created alternative spaces, which I refer to as hangout spaces, located at the peripheries of the university boundary. These are hidden from the administration and serve as important areas where students can discuss their dissertations, listen to music, and simply relax and just be. So these spaces provide essential moments of safety, friendship, and care. For queer students at Equity University, the sense of belonging is complex and multifaceted. Despite the broader institutional environment becoming more challenging, the support networks within the student community continue to offer critical moments of belonging and affirmation. These peer support networks are vital for queer students as they navigate an environment that is no longer as welcoming as it once was. The resilience of queer community at Equity University and their ability to create and sustain these pockets of belonging illustrates the enduring power of peer support and underscores the importance of maintaining these connections amid broader societal and institutional challenges. So as I conclude, I want to highlight that this presentation is part of my ongoing PhD research. I am at initial stages of analysis. So I would greatly appreciate any suggestions or recommendations for literature, theories, or other studies related to the themes discussed today. Your insights are invaluable to me, so please feel free to share your thoughts and reach out to me after the presentation. My email is included in this slide for your convenience, and thank you once again for your time, support, and generosity. It truly means a lot to me.
Well, thank you so much, Disha. That was really, really wonderful. And I really enjoyed learning about the context of India HG. That was really fascinating. I'm conscious of the last minute change in time. Are you still able to join us for a little while for some questions, maybe in half an hour or so?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful, great. In which case, thank you so much, Disha. We'll come back to some questions in a moment, but that was a wonderful presentation, so thank you so much. Okay, so just bear with me. I'm just going to upload my PowerPoint. I'm just going to share a presentation now about a paper I recently published. I'm just going to check we can see that. Just give it a moment. I can see Athena's screen. You give me a thumbs up. Wonderful. Okay, great. So this presentation, again, based upon a paper I've just recently published, which I titled Unveiling Heteronormativity, and we'll come back to the sort of matrix imagery in just a moment. But just for those that don't know me, just a brief introduction. I was a secondary school teacher for 15 years and a senior leader, and I now work as a researcher and lecturer at the University of Derby. And I finished my doctorate maybe 3 years ago now, and it was kind of inspired by my own experience of being a teacher. I started teaching in 2008 or so, and I really thought for the first many years of my career, I was the only gay teacher in the world. I really felt isolated. I really didn't know what I could and couldn't say. It felt really lonely. And for those first few years, it really affected my sense of professional identity. So that was my motivation. I wanted to learn more about, was I the only one? As the census recently tells us, no, there's about 50,000 in the UK, which is great to know. But it's that feeling of isolation we often feel in spaces because we're not always visibly obvious to each other, if you like. So just very briefly about my doctoral research, and I'll jump into this paper and some of the findings. So I did a photo elicitation study. So all that means is I asked the very kind and generous participants of my research to go into their schools and take photos. And I asked them to take photos of the spaces they felt the most and least safe, or the things that represented LGBT inclusion within their schools. Now, this is an incredible research method. If you haven't used it, visual methodologies before, or photo elicitation, I can't recommend it enough. It really blew me away with the findings because there were certain things I was expecting to find out, which I did to some extent, but the photos revealed these really powerful in-the-moment feelings, these often feelings that are fleeting, difficult to capture. But when people take a photo of those and then describe them to you in your interviews later on, you get these really powerful, visceral experiences that I don't think you'd perhaps get through traditional conversations or interviews alone. So for me, it was a really incredible research method. And there's also the fun of, because I asked my participants to send me the photos prior to our interviews to discuss them. So you're looking at them and trying to think, oh, I wonder what the significance is of this photo to this person. And for many in the case, it was the complete opposite, which is really interesting. So as I said, I had 12 LGBT teachers who were kind enough to be involved. We discussed the significance of the photos and interviews, and we had about 100 photos in total and kind of hour and a half interviews or so for each one. So naturally, of course, research of this type produced thousands, or certainly dozens of themes that were fascinating and interesting, But one of the key ones is the one that's already come up in the first two presentations this morning, particularly let's talk about heteronormativity in healthcare. So this idea of schools being heteronormative spaces, how people kind of experience heteronormativity, kind of how it's constructed, how it felt like a pressure on them at times in terms of how they could be open or not open, as the case might be. So I like this image here of what heteronormative, because, you know, in this space here today, people are nodding along. Yes, I kind of know what heteronormativity is. It might be you have a lived experience, or perhaps this is your research field. But for many people, when you explain this, people saying, can anyone else see the screen? Oh, that's worth me checking. Can someone just tell me, can you see a fishbowl? Okay, Liz, I'm not sure why that's the case. Perhaps it might be worth leaving a rejoining, or perhaps clicking the top right. Let me know. Oh, Pip, sorry. Okay, sorry, Pip. Yeah, perhaps leave and rejoin, that might help, but apologise. Yes, I like this image. I think it captures, because, you know, I often do training with staff in schools, and many of them, straight and cis colleagues, are like, I don't really understand what this heteronormativity thing is. So I like this idea of, actually, for most people, they can't see it. It's this invisible thing, and actually, if you are heterosexual cisgender, it's invisible to you because it's a social structure that centres you, and you are seen and validated, and, you know, it's somewhat it gives you that privilege. So, but actually, as we know, heteronormativity, this person in, heteronormativity privileges heterosexuality and centres that. So if you're not cisgender, if you're not heterosexual, you can actually kind of feel marginalised through that. So as much as I'd love to just show cartoons in my presentation, I should probably use a bit of theory to demonstrate that I'm an academic. So here's a couple of things that I found really helpful in terms of making sense of this idea of what heteronormativity is. Now, I've used matrix imagery here, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but actually the heterosexual matrix was a term, or an idea, if you like, coined prior to the Matrix film by our good friend Judith Butler. So Butler said, described the heterosexual matrix, which they later described as heterosexual hegemony, this conflation of sex, gender, and sexuality, which leads to this normalization, this silent assumption of heterosexuality. And I also love the work of Atkinson and Del Palma, who's done some incredible work in the early noughties in primary schools. And they describe heteronormativity as the natural order of things. It's the collective voice of reason, this tautology that explains things must be this way because it's the way they are. And I think these descriptions really capture this kind of, people assume that heteronormativity is something essential or innate or something natural in some way, and not, of course, this social construct that we all either contribute to, or, as Disha lovely said, sometimes we have this everyday resistance to. We can kind of reveal it or point it out in some way, which I think is a really nice description of that. So when Atkinson and De Palma were really, I guess, transformative for me when I started my doctoral study, because the way they wrote about some of these concepts that are quite hard to understand really made me, helped me to make sense of them. And obviously I'm using nice relevant cartoons in the century here, but they describe this idea of knitting. So I'm just going to read this quote because the way they described this construction of the matrix I found really helpful. So they said, notions of the matrix carry with them the concept of a continual process of discursive construction. And they say an appropriate metaphor here might be that someone is always knitting the matrix, rather than someone is always repairing it, as breaks are repaired in fishing nets. And the metaphor of repair implies that the matrix is something out there, which we simply need to maintain. But the notion of the matrix as a produced and productive force, sort of Foucauldian analysis there, requires the concept that we are constantly engaging in creating and recreating this through discourse. And I love that idea. Heteronormativity isn't something that's there no matter what we do about it. It's something we're constantly producing at all times. And this idea of knitting, something that's constantly being produced by people through discourse, through language, through conversation, through beliefs, through physical environment, through so many different things. So I picked out a few photos from the study, just a few, to kind of give a flavour of how in the schools people felt heteronormativity was constructed, was continuously knit in this beautiful way that De Palma and Atkinson describe. So this first one is a picture of, so again, from the photo elicitation study, this teacher taught RE, and they took this photo of the relationships and families page of the textbook, and here's the narrative they kind of gave around it. They said, I remember it was probably one of the worst lessons I've done. I did it with year 10 last year, and I remember the whole lesson got massively derailed because one of the kids was like, oh yeah, I don't mind gay people, just why do they keep shoving it down our throats? They try and teach kids about gay sex in primary schools and all of that. And there was lots of these types of narratives from the stories where people who wanted to kind of be visible as LGBT role models suddenly felt their personal identity clashing with their professional identity and feeling what unsure what they can and what they can't say. And if we look into the language being used here, I don't mind gay people, but so we're all, the subtext to what the young people are saying is, it's fine as long as it's sufficiently marginalised. It's not appropriate for a school setting, or this sort of awful trope about shoving gay sex down kids' throats type thing. All these tropes about people are being indoctrinated, or LGBT is some way age inappropriate. So for these small sort of disruptions to the heteronorm, the beliefs and ideals about heteronormativity are revealed, which I think are really interesting, because some of these, we think in many ways some of these views about LGBT people are historic, and we don't have this idea of sexual deviancy and so on. But actually, in these moments of disruption to heteronormativity, it can reveal these views. And the second one was another teacher who took a photo of a classroom, and the photo signified a conversation that took place in that space. So let's give the context first, actually. The teacher, a cover teacher, they were swapping lessons. So there's a moment of handover, and they were both sort of covering this 2-hour period. And she was explaining, as she was going in, the other teacher was explaining what she'd said to the students about why the normal or sort of day-to-day teacher wasn't there. And she said she'd been telling all of his students that he was off work because he was transitioning. And when he returned, he was no longer going to be called Mr. Steve, surname, but he was now going to be called Mrs. Stevie, surname. And it was a great big joke to her, telling all of his students that he was transitioning and he wasn't having the knee surgery at all. And she just thought it was hilarious and perfectly acceptable and a thing to joke about. And she explained how she literally almost felt paralyzed by this moment, this sort of fury, the shock and the anger. And she just said she had no way of articulating that, this idea of paralysis in that moment, because this teacher had given permission to laugh about the idea of being transgender or in any way sort of gender, not non-traditional. And this really stuck with me for a moment, because when I looked at the literature, I looked at the LGBT survey that was done in the UK in 2017, 2018. And one of the stats that really struck me was that 9% of young people reported that they'd seen their teachers say something LGBT discriminatory. And then as the narrative started to come through, it was these types of things like, because I couldn't believe that almost 10% of teachers were saying LGBT discriminatory comments. But then I realized actually it's these types of things, it's the things that are being passed off as jokes or microaggressions, might describe them as, but they're conveying these really deeply problematic ideas. So that I thought these are the types of small everyday drip effects that uphold or construct or knit the heteronormativity in schools. And then just one more in terms of these ideas of the matrix and this thing that's being constructed over time. So this was a teacher of a photo of the head teacher's office, and it was the same teacher from the previous slide. And they were getting married, and the teacher brought them a card, and they said, at the front of that card we received, and that's staff end of term gathering, the front of the card said, "Congratulations on your wedding." And the graphic at the back said Mr. and Mrs. And they were a lesbian couple. And she said, it's just so unbelievably thoughtless and insensitive and just downright stupid. That's just someone who doesn't give a flying monkeys. And because of those experiences I'd had with previous head teachers, I'm now cautious all the time in any conversation with a senior leader. I'm always cautious, and that's not a healthy thing to be. So this incident they described, where they'd been presented with this card, and last day of term in front of everybody, was a couple of schools ago, sometime in the past. But it was so significant, and it links to Liz's point about minority stress, because whenever anyone comes to a space or a situation, they of course bring their lived experience with them. And if your experience in the past has been that you had challenging relationships with senior leadership teams or felt marginalized in this way, this then affected all of her future relationships with leadership teams, where she felt on edge, cautious, again, carrying that minority stress, that sense of anxiety. So those are just three of the many examples, but I think they just reveal the small, the everyday, the dripping tap effect that can uphold or construct or continuously produce this idea of heteronormativity, something that is produced through discourse over time. So that was interesting in the study. And I think, like many people here, there's probably certain parts that I think, yeah, I can picture that, I can see examples of that. The bit that I found really interesting and exciting, and again, back to Dish's point about this idea of everyday resistance, whereas the examples where people had shown photos where they managed to disrupt or challenge or kind of puncture heteronormativity, often even just for a fleeting moment, but it allowed people to imagine an alternative, to stop that knitting and produce an alternative discourse. And I love Butler, Osborne and Segal's description of how in moments of degrounding, we can disrupt or stop the production of heteronormativity and provide alternatives. So they say this, some people would say that we need a ground from which to act. We need a shared collective ground for collective action. I think we need to pursue the moments of degrounding when we're standing in two different places at once. Or, apologies, someone's just joined. I'm just going to mute them. There we go. I think we need to pursue the moments of degrounding when we're standing in two different places at once, or we don't know exactly where we're standing, or when we produce an aesthetic practice that shakes the ground. That's where resistance to recuperation happens. It's like a breaking through to a new set of paradigms. So I love this idea of moments of degrounding, where small everyday interactions or moments within a school, in this case, can create these kind of schisms, these very brief opportunities to disrupt this idea of heteronormativity and reveal it as something socially constructed and perhaps present a more inclusive alternative. So the person's on the call, I think, that shared this, so thank you so much. This is probably one of my favorite photos from the research, and it was a word of wonder sign that they had in the school, and each week it was a different word. And this week, or the week that this photo was taken, the word was heteronormative, and they described the significance this sign had in the conversations that were had in the school. And they said, I think discussing heteronormativity is really interesting. It's such kind of almost a factual thing that everyone has assumed to be straight in the world is kind of heteronormative. I think it really forces the kids to self-reflect and reflect on their environments. And kids are so kind of malleable and easily impressionable. I think, let's discuss the word, discuss what heteronormativity is and how it can be combated. And I love this idea of the power in naming something, because immediately if we describe something as heteronormativity, it takes its power away. And we can recognize it as a socially constructed idea, something we all agents in either constructing or in disrupting. And they described how not only in the classroom that I create these really amazing conversations, also amongst staff. And then they made them all reflect upon the ways that they either upheld and produced heteronormativity or could potentially challenge it. This participant also described another situation where on a non-uniform day, a student had dressed in I think they described it as a gender non-conforming way. And again, it created this moment of degrounding where students kind of challenged the idea of what it was to be a man or a woman, or the idea of clothing being an element of social construction and heteronormativity. And they had this really, really powerful conversation. So that was a lovely example. And just one final example, this was a teacher who took a photo of their classroom to describe it as their safe space, which is really common amongst participants. And they used this photo to describe how they sort of came out to their students. It was very important for them to be a visible role model. And they explained kind of the process, if you like, afterwards. And they said, well, I think what usually will happen is they initially, when they find out, they have a bit of shock. And obviously all the stereotypes that are in their head at that time, they're kind of thinking about those. But I think the longer I teach them, the more they realize it's just such a non-part in my overall persona. Excuse me, as in like it's just such a non-issue when it comes to me being a teacher. I think the longer I teach them, they're just like, all right, this is just literally a teacher. And I love this idea that there's a cognitive reappraisal going on in their students. Initially, he described it as like weirdness when he comes out or discusses his husband, and like, oh, it's all a bit like I'm suddenly the center of conversation in this lesson rather than the learning that should be taking place. But over time, as they cognitively reassess what a gay man is in their mind, this was an Indian teacher as well, so he thought it was really important to have this sort of representation. He said it just became a non-issue. And over time, they became allies where they called out other things in the school. They asked really sort of sensitive and kind-hearted questions because they wanted to learn more. And the empathy, back to Liz's point again, the empathy it developed in them was so powerful. They became allies in the rest of the school and had these other ripple effects in terms of challenging and disrupting heteronormativity. So I just thought they were just two of many really beautiful examples of the ways in which we can create these moments of disruption, these schisms, these moments of degrounding, when we can just challenge or gently disrupt what it means to what heteronormativity is, and maybe just provide that alternative narrative or alternative discourse. So just to summarize, I apologize, a lot of text on those slides, which I don't normally do, but I want to share some of those stories. So just to conclude those points then, this idea that heteronormativity is something that's continuously produced and upheld through consent. And I think that's a really interesting word to think about this with. Its dominance can be questioned and challenged in those moments of degrounding, in those moments of disruption. And then crucially, these moments disrupt the consent required to uphold its hegemony. And, Atkinson and De Palma say all teachers should be searching for these moments at all times. Now, I appreciate teachers have got lots of other things on their mind, but I think when those small moments appear, it's grabbing those and having what can be those really powerful conversations that we've shared so far. So hopefully that's been of interest. Just briefly, all of you, or hopefully most of you will know about the network because we mentioned it already, or you're already a part of it. But if you're not part of the LGBT Research Network and would like to be, you can drop me an email or a message. We have a Teams group, but if Teams isn't your friend, as many of us have said today, we also have a LinkedIn group as well. And then finally, that's the article that I've spoke about today, about this idea of unveiling heteronormativity. So if that's of interest, you can either scan that, or I can perhaps share it in the chat bar in just a moment. But there's some more examples and discussion around that idea there as well. So thank you so much for listening for that. I'm going to unshare my screen now, which, despite giving advice to others, I'm now not sure how to do. There we go, stop sharing. Okay, great, right. I'm now going to revert back into host mode and introduce our next presenter. So our next presenter is Kelsey-Ann Caldow. First of all, they've got the world's coolest tie on, which hopefully they'll show to us in just a moment. And Kelsey's presentation is called Transforming PEPAS, a qualitative exploration of inclusion for gender diverse children and young people. So Kelsey, thanks so much, and over to you.
Hopefully that's just loading. Is everyone able to see that all right? Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, as Adam said, my name's Kelsey-Ann Caldow, my pronouns are they, them, and I have just completed my Masters in Education within the Inclusive Practice Pathway through the Open University. And I am here today to share the findings from that small-scale research project that formed my dissertation, which was entitled Transforming PEPAS, a qualitative exploration of inclusion for gender diverse children and young people. So throughout, I may use terms that might be unfamiliar or whose definition maybe depends within context. So just a wee quick overview is, so PEPAS is an acronym for physical education, physical activity and sport. So this may be so school sports, PE lessons, or after school clubs and so on. I also use the term gender diverse as an umbrella term, and that includes people whose gender does not align with that which they were assigned at birth. So examples of this may be transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. And also throughout the research, I'll refer to practitioners. And within this context, it's specifically those who provide PEPAS. So that may be teachers, coaches, volunteers, sports leaders, and so on. To give a bit of context, my research took place within Scotland in the Scottish context, specifically the West Coast, and it is important to recognise that Scotland has now had equal marriage for a decade now, as well as more recently we've had the introduction of the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act, which has specific guidance relating to homophobia, biphobia and transphobia. As well as this, we have Time for Education, or TIE, and LGBT Education Scotland, who work collaboratively and have brought about policy change as of 2021, that we now have LGBTIQ+ themes and experiences embedded within our national curriculum for excellence. And that's a policy change that is a mandatory part of education now. It's not an opt-out option. So these factors should then support Scotland to be a country which ensures inclusion and equality for the LGBTIQ+ community. And that's just to contextualise that my research findings are relevant to this context, but also recognise that this may not be the case within other countries or within other contexts. So I carried out my research with Leap Sports, which is Scotland's LGBTIQ+ sports charity, for which I've been a volunteer for over 6 years. And I've received permission from Leap and also from the family who took part in my research to name that organisation today, though I will use pseudonyms so that the anonymity of the participants is withheld. I'm also, so as I said, I'm a volunteer within Leap Sports and particularly within the family group. And the family group was created 3 years ago to support gender diverse children at primary school age, so between 6 and 12 years old, some a little bit younger at times. But the majority are aged between 6 and 12, and they come along with their families, so parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, all come along and all take part in a range of PEPAS opportunities. And then we also have opportunities afterwards to come together as a collective, talk about experiences, and then we at LEAP then can provide any sort of signposting or support that's needed. So it's really I mean, I'm very much biased, but it is an amazing group that we run twice a month with our families. And the basis of my research was to discover what factors support gender diverse children and young people to participate in PEPAS. The research revealed many layers that actually enable gender diverse individuals to do so. And what I wanted to do was conduct a semi-structured research, a semi-structured interview with one family from the gender diverse family group, and that was with Derek, who is a transgender boy, and his two siblings and his parents were all involved within the one interview. And in order to analyse the data we collected from the interview, I used Bronfenbrenner's ecological model to recognise the systems around Derek that helped to influence his participation in PEPAS. So why was this research needed? Well, research by LGBT Youth Scotland found that 94% of transgender young people within Scotland had at least one mental health condition. And likewise, Mermaid's report on transgender young people's experiences in sport also found that over half of transgender young people felt that their gender identity was a barrier to them participating in PEPAS. And our family group was very much set up being very aware of these statistics from our work within the trans community. And whilst this understanding that PEPAS, we have that understanding that PEPAS can help to alleviate mental health difficulties and support overall health and well-being, but recognise that actually transgender people who probably needed that the most were less likely to be able to access that. So we wanted to take a bit more of a positive approach, because in my kind of literature review, a lot of the research that is around transgender identities within PEPAS is very much focusing on those barriers and the difficulties they have. So I wanted to take more of a positive approach to my research and look at what actually is required to overcome those barriers, so acknowledging that they're there, but looking more towards the positive side to make it that they are able to be not only just included but actively engaged in participating in PEPAS, and ways to remove those barriers so that they're not ever having to sort of engage with them at all, and having PEPAS experiences that are empowering and affirming for them. So my research took on the form of a case study, as I had one family that were participating, and we used a semi-structured interview in order to gain qualitative data from the participants. And it was important to be able to contextualise the data collected to gain a more in-depth understanding of Derek and his family's context. In practice, this meant that at points of the research, we went off on some tangents that were not maybe specifically related to the topic of PEPAS, but did share personal background information, which allowed for a deeper understanding of what had shared their experiences. For example, Derek prompted his mum to share a part of his coming out story, and then he gave inputs as she explained that. And I think my position as an insider researcher really helped that. And that position was twofold, myself being a member of the gender diverse community, as well as being an already established group leader, really helped to develop that, and it was very beneficial because I'd already developed that positive relationship with the family, and I feel that really helped make them feel comfortable, and they were more open and quite honest about their experiences. So as I said, I used Bronfenbrenner's ecological model as my framework for analysis. So the ecological model was designed to analyse child development and recognise the systems that surround a child and how they individually influence the child, but also how these systems interact with each other and have that real impact on the child at the centre. So within my research, Derek's microsystem was his family, his school and his basketball coach, most prominently when looking at the crucial role that they played in supporting Derek to participate in PEPAS, as well as developing his overall confidence and sense of self. And I think it's important to mention at this point that Derek is very much within a minority in that he is very much actively participating in PEPAS and has had very positive experiences throughout his entire life around his identity and his experiences within PEPAS, which made him quite a unique person to work with in this study. And then we had the meso system, which recognised the links and communications between home and school, and these interactions working towards positive outcomes for Derek. And our family group then also featured within the meso system because we act as that support network for the family. Then we have the exosystem for Derek, and that featured organisations of Thai and LGBT Youth Scotland. So they didn't have a direct contact with Derek, but the school worked alongside these charities to ensure an LGBTIQ+ inclusive environment, which we saw through what we were told by Derek from his experiences at school. Within the macro system, we already discussed the Scottish context and recognise how those wider policies can impact on an individual, though this was not specifically an area that was heavily focused upon within my research at this time. And finally, we have the chrono system, which again did not factor into my research, as my research was a small scale, time limited project, and this would look at the impact over a kind of longer period of time. So as I said, Derek's had a really positive experience of being open about his gender identity, and he recognised that gender diversity from a young age, coming out to his family around age 2 or 3. And which was quite prominent because in the literature, it's usually more into the teenage years when young people are starting to come out, and a lot of the literature talking about gender diversity in PEPAS is quite often adults reflecting back onto their experiences, so it's not always in the moment. So that was quite interesting about this research, is it's very much in the moment. And a key theme throughout was that Derek has had a family who have always been very accepting and very supportive of his gender diversity. And this was clear across all of the systems, with his family supporting him, and that has enabled him to be his whole self. Furthermore, the nursery he was attending when he came out was very supportive of him through his transition, as we can see, that difference between his first year in nursery and then his second year, which is within Scotland, we do 2 years of nursery school. So he would have been 3, 4, and then into primary school aged 5. And it was really important that the nursery then ensured that continuity into the primary school. So when he started school, to quote the research, he was just recognised and accepted as the boy he is. And that ethos of acceptance and inclusion is really seen across those systems within the ecological model. And then, so Barbara, Derek's mum, had told us that before they attended the group, Derek would sometimes ask, "Why is there nobody else like me? Why am I so different?" And then when he began the group, since then, he's never asked that question again, because he has that wider experience and recognising that there are others like him, and it kind of removed that sense of isolation and solitude. And that's quite important, that within our family group, the leaders are mostly gender diverse or a part of the LGBTIQ+ community. And also when we do lots of different PEPAS activities, and quite often we will have practitioners who lead those sessions who are also a part of the LGBTIQ+ community, or who participate within LGBTIQ+ sports clubs that are kind of associated with Leap Sports as a whole. So it's a lot of real community links there, which has been really important and prominent, and something that has, and other feedback from the group, that's always been something that's been a real strength of ours. And again, this notion of representation really is a key recommendation that can be made from this research. For us, TIE and LGBT Education Scotland both focus on creating educational experiences that feature mirrors and windows. So this idea of mirrors, so learners can see themselves reflected in their educations, or in this context within PEPAS, and then those windows, so they then look outwards and they see that diverse variety of people who participate in PEPAS and within the wider society, again helping to move that sense of I'm the only one, that kind of idea of isolated feelings that can then lead to these mental health conditions we spoke about previously. So and then I just love this story from Derek's sister about a trans boy in her school, which is a high school that she attends and that Derek will attend once he gets to that age, about a trans boy going into the boys' changing room. And she kind of shared, she's like, I was waiting outside ready to go if anything kicked off. And then all it was that kind of round of applause and lots of, very West Coast, yeah, get in there, come on, yeah, yes, finally here. So it was that idea of that high school that she attends and the primary school that Derek attends work closely with Scottish LGBTIQ plus charities. So they ensure that their school has that ethos of inclusion. And I feel that story just shows that impact, that the school has supported that gender diverse young person to use a changing room where they feel comfortable. It was very young person centred there. And that kind of overarching ethos within the school you can clearly see that's filtered down into students' attitudes, where they've really received that trans young person with that acceptance and joy. There was no kind of sense of rejection or you don't belong here, which I think is really vital within our community. So my research main focus was to find out how we as PEPAS practitioners can ensure that gender diverse children, young people and participants on a wider scale are then able to fully participate within PEPAS in a way that is affirming of their gender identity. Using the ecological model to examine what has enabled Derek to be an active participant in PEPAS, I was able to then make some general recommendations for inclusive PEPAS for the gender diverse community. So having supportive and affirming interactions with family, friends and practitioners was very much a key part to allowing the gender diverse child or young person to feel accepted. And that was shown throughout all of the systems. It was those, and I think we've kind of seen that already this morning, that idea of those really positive interactions are so key in development across the whole, but particularly within a PEPAS context. And this may include acknowledging their pronouns and that use of inclusive language. So just having that opportunity to share their pronouns, but also sharing your own and creating that culture where it's the norm. So things like having it on your email sign off or a little pin on your lanyard, whatever way you kind of can show that. And it's just that little spark that shows you are, a safe place, and you have that understanding of the importance of sharing pronouns. And then it also helps to kind of combat misgendering as well. And likewise for the use of inclusive language, so degendering the language that we use, making sure everyone's included, and just being aware and reinforcing that and challenging those, kind of what Adam was saying previously, challenging when we're hearing these instances of non-inclusion. But this all does come from that understanding and implementation of LGBTIQ plus inclusion, where practitioners have received training or inputs on inclusive practices and also had opportunities to do that within their context and understanding what that means. And this may mean including access to facilities such as toilets or changing rooms, or allowing for flexible uniforms, as well as showing that representation of gender diverse identities in PEPAS. And I think that's something that's came through all morning, is this idea and this notion of the importance of that visibility. And Derek's brother Charles had shared that the story, that the school has a uniform policy, but it's a non-gendered policy. So there are boys at his school who wear skirts because that's what they want to wear, that's what they feel comfortable in, and the school have no issues with it so long as it's within the uniform guidelines, so certain length, certain colour, but it doesn't matter who's wearing it. And I think throughout, the essential part to inclusion, as shown from Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, was that necessity for holding the gender diverse young person or young person, sorry, at the centre, and really conferring with them on decisions that affect them, and having these policies and practices in place that meet their needs and can be flexible towards their needs, and then that in itself will eradicate those barriers to participation. So this research was very much a starting point, but hopefully it can help practitioners to consider their current practice, critically reflect on it, and adapt if necessary to ensure the inclusion of those gender diverse individuals. So I would just like to finish and say thanks to Derek and his family and to Leap Sport Scotland for supporting me throughout and to carry out this research with the Open University. And thanks to everyone for coming along and listening this morning. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll stop sharing and give you back to Adam.
Oh, thank you so much, Kelsey. And that was a wonderful presentation. I loved that story you shared about the changing room. That's just like a positive narrative when you share. That's really wonderful. And also, that is such an impressive piece of research for a master's. That's, I mean, do you see more research in your future, or?
We'll see.
yeah, enjoy the break. You've only just submitted, but no, congratulations. That's a really impressive piece of work. Wonderful, thank you so much. Okay, we will go to our final presenter of the morning, Athena Tripley. Now, Athena's presentation, and apologise, Athena, if I pronounce it slightly wrong, is called Gender Identity Development Among People with Klinefelter Syndrome, an investigation into the experiences and perceptions of people affected, healthcare professionals, and other experts. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Good morning. Can you all see my presentation in full screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. That's great. So good morning, everyone. My name is Athena, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a PhD student from the University of Derby. I started my PhD in January this year, so I'm a bit freshy. My research focuses on gender identity development amongst people with Klinefelter syndrome, and the aim is to investigate the experiences of people who have Klinefelter syndrome. They're real experts, healthcare professionals, but also other experts that they are working with people who have Klinefelter syndrome. So the agenda for today is that I'm going to talk about defining Klinefelter syndrome and gender identity, the harms of the gender binary system, the aims and objectives of my PhD, the methodology and contribution to knowledge. I just want to double check that you can see the Klinefelter syndrome slide. Can you see that? Excellent. So what is Klinefelter syndrome? Klinefelter syndrome is a chromosomal condition that affects development in people who are assigned male at birth, but sometimes it's called the forgotten syndrome. And why is that? Unfortunately, Klinefelter syndrome is significantly underdiagnosed. Many people have a Klinefelter syndrome and they don't know that they have it, or when they go to their GP, the general practitioner, they can't tell them that they have Klinefelter syndrome. And many people do not show any of the typical physical features associated with KS, which means that they're less likely to be diagnosed. And when they're trying to create a family and have children, KS is mostly commonly diagnosed when they're in the 30s or 40s, often when they're having investigations relating to infertility. And here I would like to emphasize that even when they get the diagnosis that they have Klinefelter syndrome, patients and their families, they often experience a diagnostic odyssey, spending months to years searching for a diagnosis and assessing treatment and support services. So, what is gender identity? According to the American Psychological Association 2015, gender refers to the attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that a given culture associates with a person's biological sex. But also, gender is often confused with sex. Sex refers to biological sex assignment, and the biological characteristics of an individual. And I would like to underline here that the gender binary system typically assumes that gender is biologically determined, assigned at birth, and stable over time. However, Tate et al. 2014 stated that gender does not necessarily correspond to the sex that people are assigned at birth. And of course, gender can be fluid and change over time and context. So what are the harms of the gender binary system? According to Hyde et al. 2019, there are 4 key harms. The first one is that it produces gender stereotypes that result to gender discrimination in diagnosis and treatment. Secondly, it saves individuals' conceptions of themselves. Thirdly, it undermines individuals' performance in stereotype domains. And fourthly, it saves legal and social policies. And here it is important to discuss that the gender binary system marginalizes and even denies the existence of individuals whose bodies or gender identities fall outside of the categories male and female. And here I'm going to talk about gender dysphoria. So according to the American Psychiatric Association 2013, gender dysphoria refers to the persistent discomfort stemming from an incongruence between assigned and experienced gender as stipulated in the DSM-5. And then we discussed that gender dysphoria affects between 8.5 to 20% of individuals with a sex development condition. And here we discussed that people with KS may be more likely to experience gender diversity or gender dysphoria. However, there is little research on gender identity amongst people with Klinefelter syndrome, not only in the UK, but globally. But this is the reason why I'm doing this, this project. So the aims of my project are to examine the gender identity development and experience of people with KS, they're real experts. And secondly, to assess the perceptions of healthcare professionals and other experts who are working with people with Klinefelter syndrome about gender identity amongst people with KS. I'm working closely with the Klinefelter Syndrome Association, which is a UK charity. And they are acting as key stakeholders and supporters of my project. And the PhD has an advisory panel of KS experts to provide advice, ensuring that the study has potential to impact on practice and policy. And the objectives of my PhD are 4, and they have and each objective has its own specific study. So study 1 is going to assess changes over time in gender identity amongst people with Klinefelter syndrome. Study 2 is going to explore the gender identity experience of people with Klinefelter syndrome. Study 3 is going to assess healthcare professionals' knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes about gender identity amongst people with KS. And last but not least, study 4 is going to offer recommendations for improving and updating gender service provisions and treatment. So the PhD is going to use mixed methods, which is the best. Study 1, which is the stage that I am right now, it's an online survey with a target sample of 80 to 100 people who have Klinefelter syndrome and they're age 16 and older. Study 2 is online interviews with people who have Klinefelter syndrome and again they're 16 and older. Study 3 is going to be a survey aimed for 50 to 60 healthcare professionals who work closely with people with KS. And the last study, study 4, is going to be an online Delphi expert consultation, and it's aimed for 10 to 20 people who are experts in the field healthcare professionals who are experts in the field to translate the findings from studies 1, 2, and 3 into recommendations for improving and updating gender service provisions and treatment. And here I would like to say that as a former practitioner at Victim Support, but also as a former chair of the Gender Empowerment Network within Victim Support and current researcher, I always use a gender affirmative approach. And why I'm doing this? Because I aim to proactively avoid pathologization of gender variance and challenge structural cisnormativity. Cisnormativity conveys the assumption that everyone is cisgender and that they should be. I recommend here that a gender affirmative approach in research and healthcare for KS diagnosis, treatment and management of the condition benefits not only people who have Clive-Andrews syndrome, but it benefits all the individuals who self-identify as transgender or gender diverse. And finally, potential contribution to knowledge. As I explained earlier on, this is really under research, very little research on this topic. That's why I'm doing this research. And I believe that diagnosis, treatment, and understanding are important tools for ensuring people with KS have the support needed to reach their potential, which means that they need to be offered a tailored service according to their needs, so they would not suffer in silence. And as I explained earlier on, using a mixed methods approach, this project will provide evidence to inform improved clinical practice, treatment guidelines, and psychosocial support. And of course, the project employs a gender affirmative approach which respects and supports KS individuals' self-identified gender. These are the references that I use for this morning's presentation. Thank you so much for coming today to my talk. This is my email if you would like to reach me after this event. Please do not hesitate to contact me if you want to ask any questions or want to get in touch about my project. Thank you so much again. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Any questions?
Thank you so much, Dina. That's really, really interesting. Thank you. So we'll come to the questions in just a moment. We'll give you just 2 minutes to catch your breath. Thank you, first of all, to all of our 5 incredible speakers this morning, each of those 4 presenters. There's been a really fantastic range and diversity there. So thank you so much for sharing your research with us. I think just before we stop the recording, I think James Rowlands has got an opportunity he'd like to share, but I think it might be helpful to have on the recording in case people are watching this later and would like to be involved. So James, if you want to share that now, that might be helpful.
Oh, yeah, great. Thanks, Adam. Hi
Sure.
everyone. My name's James. I'm at the University of Durham, and just wanted to share. I'm guest editing a journal with the Journal of Family Violence. So it's a call titled "Querying the Methodological Terrain in Interpersonal Family and Sexual Violence Research." So really, what we're trying to do is get the call out in terms of making people aware of it. I'll put it in the link as well. I'm really trying to open up some of those discussions about how we go about researching LGBTQ communities' experience of interpersonal family and sexual violence, whether that's kind of more conceptually, ethically, or methodologically. Yeah, I just wanted to share that. The deadline for abstracts is 30th of November this year, and it would be really great if you are interested, or if you know people who are interested, if you could circulate it. And definitely, I think I can probably speak for my co-editors. We're going to take a pretty broad perspective on what we're interested in and looking at. So if you've got some ideas, please do have a think. If you want to reach out and have a conversation about that as well, please just get in touch. Thanks, Adam, for the chance to share that, and I'll put it in the chat now.
It might be helpful, James, just before we stop the recording, because some people might be watching this later, not on Teams. So do you perhaps want to just verbally say your email in case anyone's watching this and would like to contact you?
Oh, yeah, it's james.h.rowlands, and Rowlands is ROWLANDS @durham.ac.uk, and the call is in the Journal of Family Violence.
That's great. Thanks, James. Really fantastic opportunity.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. So if you've been watching the recording, thank you so much for joining us and watching this, and hopefully we'll see you at our next event.